Welcome to the On the Move podcast. My name is Alan Clelland, and I'm Vice President of the Board of Management of the City of Pasadena's Community Access Corporation, and I'm a 25-year resident of the City of Pasadena. PCAC is the parent body of Pasadena Media, which operates the city's 4 community access television channels, which includes KPAS and the Arroyo channel. I'm pleased to be the host of this, the 12th of our On the Move podcasts exploring mobility issues in the city of Pasadena. Our goal is to provide information to the community on current issues of interest, present new ideas, and take an occasional look at Pasadena's history and so how we got here. And that brings us to this month's episode, which hinges around a Pasadena resident of the late 1800s who was influential ahead of and beyond his time in several different aspects of transportation and mobility. His name is Thaddeus Lowe. Don't be surprised if you've not heard of him or his key project. Neither had I until recently, and even though he has a mountain named after him. Yes, Mount Lowe, which is the same height as Mount Wilson, just to its east, and visible from Pasadena, as you'll see, his influence continues even to this day. I'm pleased to welcome as my guest today an Alhambra resident, Michael Patris, to give us background on Thaddeus and insight into Michael's latest fascinating venture here in our constantly surprising city of Pasadena. Michael, thank you for joining me and our audience here today. Could we please start our chat by you giving us a brief introduction of yourself and what first brought Thaddeus Lowe to your attention?
Well, it's an interesting thing, Alan. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm a third-generation native of LA, grew up at the beach, moved into the valley in the 80s, and I had never heard about Thaddeus Lowe or the Mount Lowe Railway until I was 29 years old. At that point in time, my grandmother was alive. We talked about it. She had been on it, so it was something that I started checking out just because I loved it. My wife and I have no children, and we have antiques and have always been fascinated with historic venues, historic structures, things of that nature. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of brought me into this circle, which ended up being a huge abyss.
Whoa. So how about an introduction to Thaddeus himself and how he came to have a mountain named after him, of all things?
So Thaddeus Lowe was born in Randolph, New Hampshire in 1832. Very interesting guy. He was one of 7 children. His mother died when he was quite young. His father remarried and had multiple children thereafter, so there were half siblings. And he had no more than a 4th grade education. He ran away from home. He worked for a shoe manufacturer. He figured out how to cut leather with oil to make it more efficient. And over time, he got interested in soap bubbles that had different types of gas in them to rise and fall at different rates. And so it was kind of a traveling quack show that he got latched onto and eventually took over, and that's where he got the name Professor. No more than a 4th grade education, multiple patents to his name, but no more than a 4th grade education.
And he was known as Professor Lowe.
That's right. So interestingly enough, Thaddeus Lowe wanted to cross the Atlantic Ocean in the world's largest balloon. He built that balloon. The outbreak of the Civil War took place, so he figured, well, if I can be of service to my country, I'll do that, and I'll worry about crossing the Atlantic later. So mind you, the jet stream was not really fully understood until probably the late 1930s. Mm-hmm. He was doing this in the 1850s, 1857, 1859, yes. Exactly, in advance of that. So he ended up working for Abraham Lincoln, building 7 balloons for the Union Army to spy on the Confederates. He ended up having malaria, so he left the Civil War by 1864, and he moved to Pasadena in 1888 just for better health. And that's when he saw the mountains and got interested in what the community was trying to do, go up into the mountains and use it as some sort of recreational area.
Amazing. Using balloons during the Civil War for surveillance?
Yes, absolutely. And photography.
And photography as well?
Sure.
That is absolutely stunning. So here he is, he's in Pasadena, and he's attracted by this idea of a railway going up into the mountains?
Yeah, so in 1888, when he came, he thought he was going to retire, but he ended up talking to the mayor and a couple of other people around, and he ended up ending up with a fellow named David McPherson. McPherson was quite the opposite of Thaddeus Lowe. He had a formal education. He was in Thomas Edison's class at Cornell. He was a railroad civil engineer, and he came here also for the same reasons Thaddeus Lowe did. Half of his family died due to TB, and he came here for the weather and better respiratory conditions. So it was those two, when they met at a city function, that they talked about getting up into the mountain. It wasn't Thaddeus Lowe's idea to get into the mountain. Everybody was talking about it. Mount Wilson was the primary target, and then it kind of evolved from there.
So the McPherson then, if he was in Edison's lab, he was more of an electrical guy. Is that what he contributed?
No, he was just in the same graduating class. They weren't taking the same courses. They just happened to be attending at the same time.
Okay, so they moved on to actually building this. How was that financed, and who was involved in it?
Well, interestingly enough, Thaddeus Lowe, during all the time of the Civil War, was trying to figure out how to fill balloons with gas out in open fields. You couldn't just pull over to a gas station and say, fill my balloon, right?
Yes, yes.
So what happened is he had ammonia gas, he had all sorts of different variations of things, helium, hydrogen, things of that nature. And he found out that creating a certain type of hydrogen gas with iron filings and sulfuric acid would work the best. But it was after numerous trials. Those failures that he had with ammonia gas and things of that nature ended up right after the Civil War leading to him heating and air conditioning virtually all of the home, 2/3 of the homes in the United States with his patented gas processes. So he came in 1888 to Southern California a very, very, very wealthy man.
Through air conditioning.
Yes.
And he probably started all this off with those soap bubbles with different gases
Absolutely,
in it.
yes.
And
yes.
carried that on into this. Air conditioning at that time.
So, and when you think about air conditioning, it's of course not like we have today. This would have been blocks of ice with refrigerator cars. So this was keeping food and produce cold so it could be kept for longer periods of time, because most people didn't have that. He, in fact, took one of his apparatus and outfitted it to a steamship that went from Galveston to New York. And it would bring beef from Texas and bring vegetables from the Northeast back down. So it went both ways. Didn't work out real well, but it was a proof of concept.
Fingers in so many pies here. And so he's a wealthy man when he came to Pasadena.
Yes. In fact, he was...
Where did he live?
So interestingly enough, he bought a piece of property that was about 15 acres on South Orange Grove. So you know where Tournament House is. Some call it the Wrigley Mansion.
Yes.
It was just down the street from that, on the same side of the street. So those 15 acres ran from Orange Grove all the way down to the Arroyo Seco. He built a 24,000 square foot house. That did not include a 5,000 square foot basement. It had an observatory attached to it because he was an amateur astronomer. And he really had an interest in having Southern California be the legitimate showplace of Southern California. Of course, at that time, San Francisco was.
Well, yes. Amazing. So here you are. You've got this very wealthy man, new to the city, and finds out about hiking trails and that sort of thing, and the idea of railway, which he obviously latches onto. So does he finance that?
He does. So when he first began construction on the railway, they filed papers of incorporation as early as 1890. And they had planned to build to the peak of Mount Wilson. But once the construction got underway, they found out that the two people that controlled the property on the top of Mount Wilson, a fellow named Strain and a fellow named Steele, they both had campgrounds there. And they were fighting over where that railway terminus would be, because if it was on one property, it would benefit that owner versus the other. So the infighting was terrible. It wasn't Thaddeus Lowe's idea to build to Mount Wilson, but because he had been around the Mount Washington Railway in Randolph, New Hampshire, where he had grown up, he knew that it could be done. It was just a matter of how.
Oh, okay.
So they tried to do bond sales, and in the 1890s, there was an international recession going on. So he financed everything, thinking over time the bond sales would remunerate him and he would be made whole.
Quite the investment then.
Indeed.
Yes. And then, so they headed towards a different mountain then?
Yes. So
Yes.
once they started at basically Lake and Calaveras, where the power station is now, that brick building on the west side of the street, that was a power station for the Pacific Electric Railway. So that came in later with Henry Huntington. But that was also the terminus of the railway that would bring you from Pasadena and Los Angeles, and some of the people who were big financiers that had large pieces of land would leave their private railway cars there, so their private Pullman cars, things of that nature. So we'll get into we'll get into that in just a moment. So Thaddeus Lowe started building from Lake and Calaveras, went to the northwest, and then headed back east into Rubio Canyon. And once they got into Rubio Canyon, it became apparent that Mount Wilson was not going to be a terminus in any way, shape, or form. So they redirected their efforts. McPherson and Lowe went up into the local mountains on horseback, spent several days, and determined this little lowly mountain called Oak Mountain would be the perfect place. There was another landing place in between called Echo Mountain, and that would be the top of the incline, and it would all work out quite well, and indeed it did.
So this mountain, Oak Mountain, became the target,
Yes.
and that's what we call Mount Lowe now.
That is. So once the construction went a little bit further, and they opened July 4th, 1893, it was during this time that they figured that they're going to try to build to the peak of Oak Mountain. Now, those private railway barons that had some amazing private Pullman cars, among them were Andrew McNally of the Rand McNally Map Company.
Oh.
So Andrew McNally said, well, henceforth and hereafter on all our maps, we will be calling Oak Mountain Mount Lowe, because all you have done, Thaddeus Lowe, to our community.
Whoa. Talk about being influential. That you
Indeed.
could change the name of a mountain.
Sure.
Yes. So it obviously didn't get built. What happened? How far did they get with this?
So they ended up building the incline and making that complete. So down in the bottom of Rubio Canyon, there was a hotel. The incline went nearly 3,000 feet at an average grade about 46%, so very steep. It had never been done before as far as the steepness goes. And once they got to Echo Mountain, they built 2 more hotels. So had Thaddeus Lowe been satisfied and stopped there, he probably would have been fine. But he pushed onward to try to achieve the peak of Mount Lowe and have the terminus there. They ran out of funds at Crystal Springs. This was by 1894. There was a natural spring where all the water would supply all the hotels. And it was at that point in time that he said, I can't go any further. I'm bankrupting myself. Yeah,
yes.
Exactly.
Yeah. So he's got these 2 hotels. They've got a rail line to it.
Correct.
How did that operate? How did the rail cars get up this incredibly steep incline?
So what happened, the cars would come from Pasadena, and that was standard gauge track. So virtually any electric trolley could come on that track into Rubio Canyon.
Steel rails, we would
Steel
call
track
them, yeah.
rails, exactly, overhead power wire. So it was very conventional at that point. The incline, if you think about Angel's Flight in downtown Los Angeles, it's a funicular. So there are 2 cars tied with a common cable. They would have one at the bottom, one at the top, and then they would have a common passing track in the middle.
Right.
So one would counterbalance the other. They were each 30 passenger cars, and they would allow the people to travel back and forth. And that would also allow the construction crew and the materials to be brought up and down the hill. One of those bodies could be removed. They could lower it down onto the deck at Rubio Canyon and place all the building materials on it, haul it up the hill, and that was augmented electricity as well.
Amazing. So here you got the 2 hotels, you got the rail line getting you up there.
So once he got to the Echo Mountain terminus, you would get off of that car. The 2 hotels were there, the Echo Mountain House, which was a large 70-room hotel, and the smaller chalet where the workers stayed so they wouldn't have to travel up and down the hill during the off-season or even while they were working. So they continued to press onward with what they called the Alpine divisions. So they wound around more than 200 curves, only about 200 feet of straight track in the next 3 miles, where they ended at Alpine Tavern. And it was at that point that they ran out of money, and they just figured they're going to build a little chalet there, which was started as a chalet, then it became Echo Mountain House, and then Echo Mountain Tavern, and then Mount Lowe Tavern. So it was rebuilt over the years. Mother Nature has a funny way of destroying things, and they kept getting rebuilt. Over time, eventually, it couldn't be sustained.
But they created rail track than going around these mountains?
Yes, absolutely. So it was decomposed granite. So that ballooned the budget more than 5 times. They originally thought that they could be able to drill into this granite and have this thing work quite well. And it was all decomposed. So every time they blasted or tried to break out an area, it went further and further and further. The costs alone were eating them alive.
But here you have an operational railway now, funicular,
yes.
the hotels to accommodate people.
Yes.
And obviously satisfying part of the goal of allowing people to get up into the mountains for the hiking trails and that sort of thing?
Yes, absolutely. So not was it only just about hiking. They brought in other things as well. They brought entertainment. There was a dance hall. There were billiards. There were even, and I've heard this from firsthand account interviews, but all those people are gone now. I've never seen a photograph, but there were slot machines there as well. And those came in the 20s from what I understand. They had a zoo. They had the world's largest searchlight that was built by General Electric. So they had an amazing, amazing place. And those that were around when it was operational and then lived into the 50s, 60s, and 70s, when I got the opportunity to meet them, this is what they called Disneyland of its day, but of course, way in advance of Walt Disney or Disneyland.
And was it financially successful? Were there enough
Absolutely
people going
not.
up there? Oh, no.
So what happened when they opened July 4th, 1893, the fare for a ride to the top of the incline and back down was $5. That was more than a week's wages. So even the laborers that built that couldn't afford to ride on it. It was for the snowbirds and the wealthy that would vacation out here to escape the winters in the Northeast.
Ah, okay. So it piggybacked on that crowd coming into
Exactly.
Pasadena in the winters.
Yes.
But that's really not sustainable if you've got all this the weather's affecting construction and that sort of thing.
Sure. So in those days, our average rainfall in this area was 24 inches. That's average. So when you couple that with cold winters, of course, you get snow.
Yeah.
So where the incline was, Rubio Canyon, there were 9 waterfalls that were upstream that would generate electricity to run that railway. And over time, they figured out when they didn't have real wet winters that they couldn't run the electricity all the time based on just the water flow. So they ended up gasoline engines. OTTO was the brand of gasoline engine they used.
Oh, yes.
And they would generate electricity and have storage cells keep that electricity so they could be operational in the summer months. But what happened, it just ballooned out of control in virtually every aspect. The hotels were good. They were well stocked with great food, alcohol, even during Prohibition. But just the $5 fee to go on that was just out of reach for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what happened over time, Thaddeus Lowe lost control by 1894. There were several interim receivers, but by 1902, Henry Huntington had purchased it and incorporated it into part of the Pacific Electric Railway, the big red cars, if you will. Yeah. And that had 1,100 miles of track in L.A., Orange, Riverside, and San Bernardino counties. So they were able to absorb the loss of that mountain railway because they made money with freight and passenger service virtually everywhere else in Southern California.
So Mount Lowe Railway became part of this network that extended over
LA
starting in Southern California.
Starting in 1902.
And attracted more people, allowed more people to come in, but at a much reduced fare, presumably.
Absolutely. So the fare went down to $1.25. So quite well reduced. Yes, absolutely. So pretty amazing. But even then, my family, as I mentioned, my grandparents grew up in Long Beach, and they couldn't afford to go up there and take pictures and things of that nature. I've told the story numerous times, and I know you've heard it elsewhere, that my grandmother, her 2 siblings, and my great-grandmother went there in 1933. It took all the spare money they had to go from Long Beach to downtown L.A. to Pasadena, up to Alpine Tavern, split 1 sandwich that they brought with them, 1 Coke for all 4 people. And I made the silly request of my grandmother, well, where are the pictures? And she said, Michael, we weren't a wealthy family. We couldn't afford a camera film.
You didn't have a camera.
And of course, we all use our phones and take pictures all the time and don't think anything of it, of course.
Yeah. There's been massive changes, obviously, in the red car network. It doesn't exist.
Sure.
So was that the demise of the Mount Lowe Railway as well?
Well, there were a lot of disasters, natural among them. Of course, it got flooded out numerous times, wildfires, lightning strikes, things of that nature, decimated and found these places underinsured. So by the 1930s, the Pacific Electric Railway had been dumping money into this for quite a few years. Alpine Tavern at that point in time was the last structure in 1936. The hotels on Echo Mountain had burned or been destroyed by 1900. Okay. Rubio Canyon by 1905. So all those structures over time had to be rebuilt. They didn't mind rebuilding those things for the Pacific Electric Railway because, of course, there was always the opportunity to bring more people and look at more stuff.
Right.
But once Alpine Tavern burned in December of 1936, they say that it was probably a faulty flue for a stove that was heating and cooking in the kitchen.
What a shame.
So it was an all-wood structure for the most part, so it burnt and it had to be scrapped. So what most people don't know is when Thaddeus Lowe first built this into the National Forest, it was just during that time that they were building into it that actually became a national forest. So Thaddeus Lowe was just building onto property, not having any rights to do so. And the federal government told him, okay, you can go ahead and build this, but once you cease operation, it reverts back to the Forest Service, and there will be no more conveyances or railroads up here.
That would be it.
Exactly. So by 1936, that was the end of that.
That was the end of that.
Yes.
Yeah. So if somebody wanted to trace the route of the railway, you said from the lake in Calaveras.
Yes.
Is that possible? I mean, is there anything to see these days?
Yeah, of course. There's the powerhouse that I mentioned that's on the west side of Lake in Calaveras that supplied power for the Pacific Electric Railway to run the PE Red cars in the Northern Division, which encompassed a lot of Pasadena. And if you go to our website, Mount Lowe, MOUNTLOWE.org, you can look at some of the maps and look at some of the former right-of-ways. Okay. And we've also done then and now photography that show you what was there then and how you can decipher what is there now. But if you look at places like Poppy Fields Drive or Mount Lowe Drive or Mount Curve Drive, those were all former right-of-ways of the railway. So you can drive in your car and see a lot of it with no trouble. Once you get up into the mountains, you can go on the Sam Merrill Trail, which is at Alta Loma and Lake. You can make that 3-mile trek up to Echo Mountain and see kind of what was there. That trail's been there since the Native Americans inhabited the area.
Fascinating. Oh, that's, having those then and now pics, with looking at those before you go on the trek.
Sure.
And the hike would be interesting, so you could appreciate it more.
Yes, absolutely.
Wow, that's fascinating. He was quite a character, Thaddeus, wasn't he?
He was indeed. I mean, more than 200 patents and no more than a 4th grade education, dabbling in natural gas, illuminating gas, ships that had refrigeration systems on them. I mean, he really was a Renaissance man.
Ships as well, so that's balloons, rail, ships.
Absolutely, yes. In fact, when he died in 1913, he was in the process of developing an airship that would travel by a suspended aerial cable to bring people from Pasadena to the peak of Mount Lowe, but on the cable with a balloon with a cabin car underneath it. It was an amazing thing. And it never got built, but he had a proof of concept, and it would have been an amazing, amazing thing. It was widely publicized and known in Pasadena in 1910 and a little thereafter.
Did he ever take any of his balloons on ships? If he was involved in both?
Very good question. So yes, what I call the very first aircraft carrier was a converted naval barge, and he put a balloon on it and ran it on the Potomac and did the first aerial ascension from a balloon, from a barge. It was an amazing thing, yes.
I can see why you got so interested in him. And did that lead you to found, is it the Mount Lowe Conservancy?
Mount Lowe Preservation Society. So we started that back in 2000, and we had a goal of preserving images, historical artifacts, things of that nature that pertain to Thaddeus Lowe, the Mount Lowe Railway, and of course his previous work with the Civil War Balloon Corps and all of his aeronautical type stuff. But because the Mount Lowe Railway lasted only from 1893 till 1894 with Thaddeus Lowe, we looked at what existed beyond that, and we've got thousands of souvenirs and photographs in a research library, things of that nature. But Henry Huntington really added to that by advertising it greatly and getting a lot of people to come up there that normally wouldn't have known about it or have had the ability to go. So we have encompassed not only the Mount Lowe Railway, but then the subsequent company Pacific Electric Railway. And then when Henry Huntington died in 1927, it became part of the Southern Pacific Railway. So we've really expanded our focus quite a bit to include all of Southern California railway and transportation, so buses, things of that nature.
So you've collected information, objects?
Everything, all of the above. So our image collection numbers more than 800,000 pieces, three-dimensional artifacts more than 200,000 pieces, a research library in excess of 8,000 books. We've got an indoor railroad signal garden, a few antique cars, many of which pertain to the railway. Yes, absolutely. Always good to know railroad signaling,
Okay,
right?
so where is this?
So this is off of Veneto and Foothill, which is near San Gabriel in East Pasadena, Lamanda Park.
It's stunning, stunning. Now, this is not, as far as I know, it's not open to the public.
So we're not open to the public yet. We're open by invitation and by appointment. And so we make ourselves available for research. We've guest curated shows at the Pasadena Museum of History. We've loaned things to the Huntington Library, things of that nature. And I do constant lectures and things of that ilk as well. So we always are spreading the word and always looking for more things. And we also have a company called Golden West Books. We publish books on trains and railroads. Yeah. And so we try to keep the information out there. We try to keep an online archives where people can stay at home, wear their PJs, and cruise around and look at all the things that we've accumulated, and we try to add content all the time.
Amazing. So is there what are your goals for the future for the Preservation Society? And
when we began this nonprofit back in 2000, our main goal was to get a building. So in 2011, we were able to get a building that's 14,000 square feet on a third of an acre. We were very blessed to be able to obtain this piece of property. And we thought it would take 3 or 4 years to renovate this and get it open to where people could come and make use of it. But there are a lot of things that ended up being roadblocks, and we're trying to make lemonade out of lemons, and we're trying to be as ADA compliant as possible. We've torn out and replaced all the restrooms so they're ADA compliant. We have fire sprinklers now. We have dedicated ADA compliant parking that's in the works. We've just gotten to the halfway point of building an elevator that will be ADA compliant as well. And we won't really have public access to the second floor because it's archival storage, but we will have that there in case there's a need for it. So I'm hoping in the next year or so, we will be able to actually have shows in our gallery space. And if not, we'll still be able to loan things to other institutions, and we still, of course, lecture about it as well.
Okay, so it's worthwhile for people to contact you.
Absolutely.
To satiate their interest in the...
Sure.
In this whole topic. Fascinating.
Yes. It's a huge rabbit hole from whence I've never recovered.
Right. I think it's worth repeating that contact information that you just gave.
Certainly. So our nonprofit is Mount Lowe, spelled out MOUNTLOWE.org. We also have Pacific Electric Railway Historical Society Archives. That's PERYHS.org, and goldenwestbooks.com. Which is our publishing company. And all those are intertwined, and you can log on to any of those, or you can type Mount Lowe Preservation Society and have a gander.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Michael. Thank you very, very much for providing us with such insight into this fascinating project of yours and that project of the past of Thaddeus Lowe. Just absolutely amazing. And we really appreciate your efforts to keep history alive today so that we can all enjoy it and appreciate it. I'm sure the audience will join me in wishing you much success for your own venture.
Thank you.
As it progresses. And I'd also like to thank the audience for tuning into this episode, and would encourage you to follow future episodes of our podcast. They've all been very interesting. Thank you very, very much, Michael.
Thank you, Alan.